beneath the attic last night. The first sound woke me at 3 and something, a hollow, persistent tapping that seemed to come from directly below the attic floorboards. I lived in archives for a living. Cataloging old hums and brittle things is my work, not my life. Yet the noise felt like a misfiled memory with fingers. Rowan House had been silent for most of the months since I inherited it, except for the settling creaks of old timber. This tapping, though, carved space between heartbeats, as if the house were rehearsing a small, private accusation. I told myself it was a loose shutter or a branch calling against the eaves. Yet, when I climbed the narrow stairs, my footsteps answered too loudly, and the sound stopped. Beneath the single naked bulb, the boxes looked like anonymous people at rest. I ran gloved fingers along cardboard and brittle trunks, listening for any echo. Nothing. The house held its breath, as if embarrassed by the interruption. I left the bulb on and slept with the bedroom door half open, waiting for the tapping to resume so I could catch it in the act. The tapping returned the next night, exactly the same, and it seemed to learn me. It came sooner when I had drunk tea, later when I had tried to tire myself out. It was not mechanical, really. It had the rhythm of someone trying to remember a name. I began to record the sound on my phone, though when I played it back, the waveform looked ordinary, and the playback kept skipping at the very moment I felt the prickle behind my eyes. It was like trying to photograph a face in a mirror that refuses to be framed. Lydia Hargrove brought lemon pound cake the week after the tapping started. She hovered in the doorway and smiled too long. Hands found each other like someone learning how to hold silence. Old houses hear things differently, she said, but her eyes moved to the attic window and didn't rest. She told a story about a tenant decades ago who swore the house kept a ledger. Small noises counted like transactions. Whether she meant superstition or something more practical, the sentence lodged in me. A house that kept things beneath its boards. I began to test the house like a cautious chemist. I laid cloth over the attic floor where the sound seemed strongest, walked the upstairs rooms at odd hours, even taped paper strips to the boards to catch a pattern. The paper never moved, but sometimes the dust on top of them shifted into ridges that looked like small handwriting. At midnight, the grandfather clock in the parlor, which had been silent for years, clicked once, as if unhappy with my meddling, and then stopped again. That single click made the hair along my neck stand straight, not with fear so much as recognition. The oddness followed small, private rules. If I spoke aloud to the house, it answered by rearranging little things. A sock moved from a drawer to the hall. A mason jar shifted on the sill. Once, I found the mercury mirror in the parlor angled slightly after I had been through, though I was sure I hadn't touched it. The reflection in that mirror never matched the room exactly. Corners bent when I blinked. I began to feel that the house was not merely a building, but a listener, and that listening changes what lives inside it. A week in, I discovered the key. It was looped on a thin thread pinned behind the attic eaves, tucked into an old trunk I hadn't opened yet. The brass was cold in my palm, its teeth worn in a way that suggested it had been used often and rarely. It had no tag, but someone had wrapped a scrap of paper around the thread with a smudge that might have been a single letter. Keys are promises. You cannot hold a key forever without imagining the door it belongs to. That night, the tapping worried itself into a slow, deliberate knock right above my head. I tried the key on every lock I could find. It turned in none. In the basement, in closets, the front door, nothing. The attic hatch had no obvious lock, yet sometimes, when I laid my ear to the boards, the tapping would slow as if waiting. I began to leave notes under the bulb, little questions addressed to whatever counted the house's transactions. On 2 of the papers, someone had rubbed the edges, as if reading and replacing them. The handwriting in the smudges belonged to no one I knew, and none I could remember. Sleep thinned. I learned to read the tempos of the house, how the heating vents sighed like a tired throat at 2 a.m., how the porch boards whispered as if trying to warn me away. Sometimes, if I held the key up to the attic bulb, the metal would catch the light and throw a sliver onto the floor where the tapping happened, a pale, consistent triangle that did not belong to any object. Once, in that triangle, I thought I saw the faint outline of what might have been a shallow notch in the wood, like a door seam. The notch closed when I blinked. At the brink of whatever I was about to become, I did something I chastise myself for now. I tried to force resolution. I pried at the floorboards with a crowbar. The wood gave grudgingly, and then fit together again as if embarrassed. Beneath the gap, there was not darkness so much as an inverse of light, a held breath. From there, the tapping changed into the almost human pattern of fingers rapping a rhythm. 2 quick taps, a pause, 3 softer. It was a sequence I'd heard before. I found myself answering on instinct, tapping my knuckles back in the same cadence. When I tapped back, the pause stretched, and the response was immediate but different, not a mimic, but a reply. The tapping became a conversation, and whatever lay beneath spoke in a way that didn't use words, but weighed like memory. I pressed the key's teeth into the notch, thinking of locksmiths and systems, of bolts that answer only to certain requests. The key sat for a moment, as if considering, and then turned, not with a satisfying click, but with a shiver that traveled up my arm and settled behind my sternum like a small stone. The attic exhaled, and something beneath that exhale rearranged itself. The dust ridge on my paper spelled a name I knew, in a sense deeper than recall. The grandfather clock clicked twice, then wound backward for a breath before staling again. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, as if someone had sat where my memories would normally put a person. I left the key where it fit and closed the small gap, hammering gentle nails back into place like a parent doing a patch job for a child who had cut themselves on a wayward wire. For 3 days the tapping paused. The house seemed to hold a private settlement. I told myself I was safe, that I had put the thing back where it belonged. But the peacefulness came with its own weight, and on the 4th night, the sound returned not from above, but from the base of the house. Soft, urgent breathing at the rusty vent near the foundation. When I approached that small rectangle of metal, my breath fogged its edges, and my reflection looked like someone I had seen in the mirror weeks ago. Tired, too willing to believe rules about locks and keys. I could have left the house that night. Instead, I did something quieter. I sat cross-legged on the back steps and listed the things I would take if the house decided to keep the rest. I learned then that some houses are not repositories of objects, but of habits, and that removing an object does not always remove the claim. The final line of the ledger was not a thing, it was a question, and I had answered. Whether that answer saved me or signed me into the count is a ledger the house keeps well. I still hear soft tapping when the night is thick. Sometimes I tap back, more gently now, because questions have a way of needing persistent, patient replies.